Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
It's time for another episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. My guest on today's show is Michael Diettrich-Chastain. I came to be connected to him through another person who is on this podcast, Rachel, and it has been excellent to get to know him and all of the amazing work he's doing in his company. You're going to love this episode if you want to learn more about changes, how we can make changes stick, how to adapt when there are big changes going on, which is extremely relevant in a time like now. Michael is the founder and CEO of ARC Integrated, an organizational consulting and professional coaching practice in North Carolina. ARC empowers individuals and organizations to achieve optimum performance in their work and life. As a professional coach, he works with leaders to reduce stress and improve work-life balance or enhance leadership skills. And he has also helped these leaders and teams improve retention, productivity, engagement, and sales. He is also the author of Changes, the Busy Professional's Guide to Reducing Stress, Accomplishing Goals, and Mastering Adaptability. I would love for you to stay tuned to this episode because he talks about how you can get a copy of that book and many other resources for free. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I got a lot out of it. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. At the time you're hearing this episode, there's probably still a lot of changes going on in the world. And that's why today's guest is the perfect person to talk all about changes, because that is the title of his book as well. So we're going to talk about all kinds of different things that help you adjust to personal and professional changes and some of the thinking and thought leadership behind all of that. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's great to be here.
I would love to hear how you got started in this. Now you have a company, you have a lot of experience, you've written a book. How did you get started as an entrepreneur?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my career started, in college, thinking about what did I want to do with my career and with my life. And at the time, I was thinking about a PhD or a master's in industrial organizational psychology, which is, basically the idea of evaluating human systems in a business and seeing how that human system impacts the effectiveness of a business. So think things like leadership and team performance and communication. And funny enough, that's largely the work that I do today, although it took a while to get back to that point. Out of college, I took a job in the corporate world and learned a ton about leadership and did a lot of leadership coaching and account management and employee-employer conflict resolution, a number of other things. But that experience really, it triggered an interest in taking a deeper dive into human development. And so I went back and got a master's in counseling and then became licensed as a psychotherapist and lived in the mental health world for a number of years in a variety of contexts, from working in community mental health to working in the school systems, the prison systems, the hospital systems, led teams of therapists. So it had a really wide spectrum of seeing how human beings create change in their life, from those that, were barely getting their human needs met to people just going through life transition, career change, or loss of a relationship, or maybe addiction, other things. And still had this interest in systems and business. And so made a pivot back to corporate a number of years ago and started my company. And in the last 5 or 6 years, the work that we've been doing has largely been spent around helping leaders, teams, and organizations become peak performing. So that's the 30,000 foot answer.
Yeah, no, and I find that super interesting because a lot of people who get started as entrepreneurs, increasingly we're seeing more people want to dive right into their business, after they finish college or graduate school. And I think there's a real benefit to getting some other additional experience first, right? Like, I'm sure your experience working in the corporate environment was instrumental to you being able to more effectively serve that audience in the future. And so I'm curious, for people who are interested in potentially becoming entrepreneurs, would you recommend that they go and kind of get some life and professional experience first? Was that helpful as far as it applies to your story?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer that all life and work experience is totally relevant. And it's really to me, the bigger challenge is like pulling the fruits or the gold out of the experience. And so I'll give you an example from my own life. One of the things that I did kind of in between various times was worked in the restaurant business in various capacities, from management to bartending to serving. And, those experiences, even though very different industry wise, taught me a lot about managing crisis, about customer service, about managing conflict, about leadership. And so all of those lessons absolutely apply in the work that we do with executives and leaders of large organizations. And so I think, for folks that are wondering, what kind of experience might they need for their specific field, my suggestion would be looking at the experience you've had, what kind of lessons and gold might be in those experiences that aren't exactly the same industry, but maybe there's lessons that you can apply to the industry that you're in.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's so true, because a lot of times it's almost like you get inspired by that experience of whatever it was that you did immediately after college. And even if it's not what you choose to stay around and do forever, you can always pull really powerful lessons from that can inform your future. So you have you have an extensive background in watching people go through changes in their life. Are there maybe a handful of takeaways, like things that you witnessed, whether it was, more of a scientific measurement or whether it's anecdotally, trends that you saw consistently that might surprise people or be really interesting for them?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. I think the first thing as it relates to change that I think is really important for all of us to remember is that it's inevitable. And so I think, as human beings, we typically resist change because it's unpredictable and it's sometimes uncomfortable. And the reality is it's the one thing we can absolutely count on. And that's in every aspect of our lived experience. And so I think, that's kind of a large scale meta way to think about it is, how can we as humans get more comfortable with change in all aspects? And then the other thing I would say is, it regards to these commonalities or common principles. I started to ask myself that question a few years ago about, what are the common principles of change, regardless of what the change is, whether it's an executive wanting to engage his leaders or someone that wants to get into healthier relationships or moving through an addiction or someone moving through a career change or wants to make more money or fill in the blank. In my experience, there are 7 major predictors of success as it relates to moving through change effectively. And that's essentially what the book covers that I wrote.
Wow, that's really interesting, because I think the first point that you made is really important, that change is going to happen no matter what. I mean, at the time we're recording this, we're several weeks into a worldwide pandemic, and I think change has almost become the new normal. Most of us are waiting to hear on a day-by-day basis, what is happening. Our Minnesota governor just issued our stay-at-home order for 2 weeks yesterday, and my husband is a physician going into work without a mask or other protective gear right now. And so it feels like complete chaos at times. Are there things that we can do when we feel like the winds of change are blowing to, I think one thing that happens to people is they get panicked right away. They're like, oh my gosh, things are changing. And it's the uncertainty that makes them feel very nervous. Are there things that you can do in those early phases of changes? I mean, we have a lot of people right now who are losing their jobs, their hours are being cut, or work just looks totally different for them. Are there things that people can do in those early stages to kind of remain calm and figure out how to thrive in a new normal?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm happy to take a quick review of these 7 principles, which in my experience, if we can get better at these principles, they will absolutely impact our ability to navigate those really challenging times that, like you said, we're in the midst of right now. And so I can cover those, but I would say also in addition to those 7 principles, there's also an element of an opportunity in the questions that we ask ourselves in the midst of the storm, let's say. And so, one question to consider is, when has there been a time in my life in which I've been resilient during a time of uncertainty, or I've been resilient when it seemed like there was no options available. So I think positively reflecting on our strengths and when have we shown up at our best is one thing, one like immediate action we can take to kind of push back on some of the stress that's involved.
That's so true. I always tell people, you have a 100% success rate of surviving your bad days. And so you have to think back about like, this is not the first time that you faced a challenge and had to overcome it. And it probably won't be the last time that happens either. But you can think back about even your own personal experiences about when you've had to adapt and be resilient in some of those situations. Are you curious about how to get started working as a search engine optimization writer? Always loved writing, but don't understand the technical elements? No worries, you can easily teach yourself. And this podcast episode is sponsored by the Advanced SEO Writing for Freelancers and Bloggers course. You can learn more all about how to choose keywords, how to pick topics for your clients, how to complete a content strategy audit, and how to write a fully optimized SEO piece of content writing that you can sell for $50 and up. Check out tinyurl.com/advanced SEO writer to learn more about this course and to enroll. So you've done a lot of work at the executive level. Who is the perfect type of person to read your book?
I love that question. Yeah. So the subtitle of the book is The Busy Professional's Guide to Reducing Stress, Accomplishing Goals, and Mastering Adaptability. And so I would say if that subtitle strikes interest, then the book is for you. I specifically wrote it though for the busy professional. A lot of the folks that I've worked with over the years are high performers or high achievers. And so they're real busy. They're wanting to pursue a lot in life. They have big goals. And at the same time, maybe struggle with managing stress or struggle with high expectations of themselves and others, and maybe have some blind spots that they're not aware of. And so maybe they've done some reading and personal development before. They've taken some courses, and yet they still feel a sense of stuckness. Mm-hmm. And so it's for that person that feels like they've done some work and just can't quite figure out what's holding them back. And in my opinion, the activities and the principles in the book are the answer to that stuckness.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about the activities. I know there's activities in the book, but you mentioned something super cool, that you have this like card deck that can come along with the book that people can actually use to implement some of the tools you recommend. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. And at the end of our call, I'll give a link to folks that they can actually go get a free virtual version of this. It's kind of a preview, but awesome. The card deck is a physical card deck. So imagine, I'm sure a number of your listeners have seen question decks before. And so the way this one is there's 7 principles in the book. And within the card deck, there's 7 principles as well, and 7 questions within each. And so there's 49 questions total. And again, to circle back to that opportunity of the questions that we ask ourselves really impact the results. That's the spirit behind the deck, is to ask ourselves and each other better questions within each of the 7 principles that are so opportunistic, to ensure that each one is optimized and that we're giving appropriate attention to each one of these 7.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that sounds interesting. Can you do a little bit of an explanation about the 7 principles that you bring up in the book, kind of like the, a fun size or bite size version of those? Because of course, to get the full benefit of everything, someone would have to read the book, but I'd love to just know kind of the basics of what those are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give all 7 in a really short description, and then happy to answer questions from there. So, and before I do, I'll mention that the 7 is actually an acronym. And the way that I landed on this acronym is when I was, first starting to evaluate the research behind change making, as well as my own experience working with thousands of clients over the years. I started to ask myself, what are these common principles? And so I had this spreadsheet that had the 7 principles that I thought, were consistent across thousands of clients. And after that, asked myself, well, wouldn't it be cool if there was an acronym for these 7? Mm-hmm. And so that's actually how the title of the book came about, which is Changes. So Changes is the acronym, and I'll tell you what the words are. So the first one is cognition, which is how we think, what we tend to focus on. And that's very relevant to the idea of question asking. So are we asking ourselves life-giving questions? Are we asking ourselves strength-based questions? or we focus on problem, right? So that's cognition. Heart is number 2, our emotional self. How much attention are we giving it? Are we ignoring it? Action is number 3, and that's the habits and routines that we have daily, weekly, monthly. N is nourishment, which is our physical experience, how we sleep, how we move, how we eat, all those things that we hear so often that impact stress. G is guts, which is our level of courage to act. So if you can think, and I know we can all think of times in which we knew the right answer for something, but didn't have the courage to go forward with it. So that's guts. The next is environment, which is the people, places, and things that we surround ourselves with most and how they're influencing our ability to create the life we want. And finally, the last one is spirit, which is all about our belief systems, the big beliefs and, where do we come from as humans? Where are we going when we die? And then the small beliefs around, what's possible in any given day, or what's possible in a lifetime or a year, or how, what's possible in the goals that I might have for my life. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you have about any of those 7, Laura.
Yeah. Do you recommend that people start in a particular place? Is there kind of a linchpin or a foundation where it's like fixing the other things or better understanding these other aspects won't work as well if you don't kind of have that one lined up?
Mm-hmm. The answer I usually give to that question is that it's going to depend on the season of the person's life and the area in which they have strengths in. And so I'll give you an example. It might be that, we're in the early part of 2020, more or less. And it might be that right now, any given person is, they're physically active, they feel good, their body is being nourished, and maybe their emotional self is really positive there as well. But the people, places, and things they're surrounding themselves with are actually disrupting the goals that they have. Right. And so they give that attention, and then that makes some changes for them. And then next year, it turns out that maybe they realize that there's some belief systems that they've had from childhood, maybe that have never been challenged, or even belief systems that they've gathered in the last few years that are really disrupting their ability to create the life they want. So I think that the nature of what needs attention can change, in any given quarter of the year, let's say, or maybe in any given month.
Wow. That's fascinating. I think a lot of people, we have this interest in change, and, we see this with New Year's resolutions too, when we're trying to change for the positive, or we recognize there's something in our life that we could do better. It's so easy to get that momentum going when you first start, or even feeling the pressure of something that you might think is a negative change. You have that momentum when you first start. How do you keep that momentum moving forward when it gets to the hard parts of dealing with change?
Yeah, there's a great activity in the book that's probably too long than what we have time for, but I would encourage folks to check it out. But to give you a short synopsis of that, I think consistently examining our motivation for what it is that we want, in addition to identifying what is on the other side of this goal, what would be the benefits of achieving it. Another question to ask is what are the costs of quitting?
Yeah.
Right. And another question to ask is what are the kind of tertiary benefits? Meaning, if I accomplish this goal, how might it positively impact my family or my community or my workplace, or what, all that is dependent upon the goal, but thinking about what are the benefits beyond me. Another question to ask about, feeling stagnation in a goal is, how might I teach what it is that I'm practicing, which can really increase motivation and interest and energy in any goal that we're pursuing, or how can I adjust the practice of the goal a little bit to make it a little bit more interesting? And again, all the details around this are dependent upon what the goal is, but asking ourselves these important questions and making little tweaks along the way, in my experience, that's what creates momentum.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that. There's so much that goes into it, and it's important to think about all the different ways that you could keep that momentum going and stay positive when it gets to the hard part. Because I think a lot of people today are looking for that sort of magic bullet solution where it's just going to be super easy and everything is fixed. And the truth is that a lot of stuff is just plain hard, and a lot of people give up. It's what they call the dip, when you get to that low part and it doesn't feel like you're ever going to get out of the part that's challenging and difficult. But it's the people who persist and find ways to cope with that challenge that are able to come out on the other side. So one of the things we talked about before this call was seeing what one of these cards from the deck looks like, or I guess we'll do what it sounds like. So if you're still game for that, I'd love to hear what one of these is.
That's great, Laura. So yeah, if you're up to play a little bit, what I would ask you is, of any of the dimensions that you heard, the principles, which of the 7 drew your interest most?
Oh, I guess I would say when you were talking about nourishment, I think that's been one of the things that's, come up for me is like, I just feel like being at home more lately, like you're very much more aware of the way that you treat yourself, like physically and mentally and all of that, and like how you restore your energy. So I would say that's probably what jumps out to me. Okay,
great. So what I'm doing right now is I am choosing kind of I've got the deck in my hand here for those that are listening. I'm choosing one at random here. So I've got nourishment one in my hand. Let's see. How about this one? How about, when was a time you felt the most physically healthy and how did you know?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know the answer to this one.
All right.
Sure. And it's sad that it was so long ago.
That's all right.
When I first met my husband, I was preparing to compete in the Miss Virginia pageant. And so I was in part of that involved wearing a swimsuit on stage. And there is nothing like that to get your butt in gear, literally. So I knew that I was in shape because he and I would go on hikes all the time. That was one of the things we did a lot when we first started dating. And I didn't feel winded. And so it was always really cool to like get to the top of the hike and feel like, oh, hey, like I definitely broke a sweat, but I don't feel exhausted. I don't feel shortness of breath. I don't feel like I'm, sweating profusely here. And so for me, it was really good, to feel like that and feel like I was strong and like my body was kind of like in, peak condition and my immune system was up and all of that.
That's so cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I love it.
So I think, there's all sorts of ways to use this card deck, right? You can use it in one-on-one conversations, right? And so of course, if we had more time, we could talk about like, what is bringing up that story make you think about, or how, what kind of energy does that create for you? Is there anything about that you might want to apply now? So that brings up all these additional questions, right? So that's an opportunity. It's also an opportunity just to get to know each other better, right? So I've been using these decks for a long time, and I've gotten feedback from coaches that will use it in client meetings, from people that will bring it into their family dinners, to team boardroom meetings at organizations. I've used it with hundreds of people in a room where we're doing like question swaps and meeting in small groups to discuss ideas. And so there's all sorts of ways to use questions. I'm a big believer in the power of questions, as you probably are gathering.
Yeah, but I think it's so powerful too. And it's one of the reasons why when I coach other freelancers, a lot of what I do is ask questions. And that probably frustrates them at the beginning because they'll be like, oh, I'm stressed out or I'm tired. And so it's like, okay, there is no like, I have the magic secret over here and I'll tell you these 3 things and then you're going to be able to fix it. It's more about like, what questions are we going to ask to dig into that? Why are you feeling tired? Why are you so exhausted? Because we can apply Band-Aids to the situation, but if it's that you hate the kind of work you're doing, or you have the wrong clients, or you're putting in 50 hours a week and being underpaid, that is something we can fix. But sometimes it takes asking those questions to dig into it. And I really like that because we don't do enough of the question asking in society today, right? We hear a lot of people telling us what to do, and we sit there and go, yeah, so-and-so said that. That's a great productivity tip, or that's a great health and wellness tip. But we don't actually apply it because we don't think about how we personally would internalize that and what about us is going to motivate us to make that actually happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm with you. I'm anti Band-Aid. And so I think, one way to get away from that, Band-Aid paradigm is to do just that, is to ask ourselves and each other better questions so that we can land on better solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm lucky enough that I have a copy of the book, but where can other people go to learn more about the work you do and to get a copy of the book for themselves?
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much. So we're giving away a bit of a bundle, actually. So a bunch of free resources. If they go to thechangesbook.com, and they can learn more about the book there, and it'll link to places where you can purchase it. But in addition to that, we're giving away a bundle, and I'll tell you what's all included in that. They'll get a full audio version of the book. They'll get chapter 1 digitally. They'll also get a workbook which goes in more detail about some of the activities that are related to each of the 7 principles, so that you're ensuring optimization for success within each. And then finally, in addition to that, they'll get a tip sheet, which is 10 ways in which they can use this card deck. And on that tip sheet, there's a link that will take you to a virtual version. And so, in this time that we're in, everything is moving online, and we're trying to coordinate meeting spaces and have really effective, engaging meetings online. And so this virtual tool allows for some of that, allows for high levels of engagement in online spaces. And so they can get that entire bundle just for, dropping their email address in, and we'll send some additional resources beyond that down the road.
Oh, that sounds perfect. A great way to focus on some positive things during these challenging times, and, look for ways to not just keep yourself occupied, but learn new things and figure out how you can use these resources to engage with people virtually, even if that's your work team. So I love that. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all of your insights. It was really interesting for me to hear you explain it, now that I have worked through some of the book, and it just was great to get to interview you and get your personal take on things.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks for your willingness to share some of your story and